right, so today's project is sewing with knits, and I have this so soft. I've pre-washed it. It's 100% cotton, but it's crazy soft knit. Lots of stretch to it, okay? And this is the pattern that I'm going to be doing. Okay, can you see that? Simplicity 8874. And I will be attempting this sleeve variation. It's a little bit longer and it's got a little tie. That sounded cute. This is a very easy pattern. No zipper. I thought it had one, but no zipper. And it's just straight seams, hem, facings, things like that. So I'm going to show you a couple tricks to make sure that your knit garment's going to hold its shape, and a trick to make the hem on a knit garment be nice and smooth. And it's going to be a quick one. This should go really fast. And one of the purposes of this dress is just to show people who are somewhat intimidated by making things out of knit that it's not that big of a deal. So let's get started cutting. So on this dress, one of the first choices you need to make is which kind of neckline. There are two different ones. One that's more like a little short jewel neckline, and one that's a little bit deeper, more like the ones that they're showing here. I'm going to go with the deeper neckline, and if you go with this one, the back side is also deeper. I want to do a quick recap on how you're going to pick your sizes, because on a dress that is this very smooth lined and a stretch knit, I'm going to want it to be very close to my actual body size at my widest point. For me, that's going to be my bust. So what I do is say my bust size is 40 inches. When I'm just doing with my patterns, I'm only dealing with half of my body at a time, one half of the front and a half of the back. So I'm going to deal with half of this measurement. So I'm going to deal with 20 inches for right now. I want this garment to have at least an inch of ease in it at the bust so that it's not going to cling too hard. So half of an inch, because I'm dealing with half of my body, I'm going to add a ½ inch to that. Then I need to make sure I'm accounting for the seam allowances. This is on a fold, so there's nothing there. There's one here, and a center back one. So that's 3 seam allowances per side. So I'm just going to round it to ½ an inch per seam allowance. So that's another 1½ inches I need. So that's going to bring me to 22 inches per side from pattern edge to pattern edge that I need at my widest point, which is my bust. Hoping this makes sense. So what I do, now I've cut out a 16, and I wanted to show you on the size here. All right, so you measure it so that you're measuring across at the widest point. And for me, I am going to be measuring across the bust just above where these dart lines are. So the first thing I'm going to hit over here is the back, and I'm going to go straight across from the edge here to this. This is pretty much where my bust is. If you see, you know, the apex is down here, so it's not right at the armhole, but it's slightly lower. So I bring it over to my size 16, and I'm right less than 10½ inches. I'm going to set that over here at this edge of my 16, right above those dart lines, and bring it over, which is going to give me about 21 5/8, which is pretty darn close. So on the skirt, it comes in 2 lengths, super thigh-high short and very, very long. And those are the only 2 marking lines. I'm somewhere in between there. The measurement I need from up here, which is just below waist level, to the end of my skirt is 28. So I'm going to go ahead and measure that as I cut, which is going to put it, you know, right about midway here. So what I'm doing is just following it along You can't cut it straight because this is a curved skirt. So I want to give you a little update on my philosophy of laying out and cutting out. In general, I look at the diagrams that they give, but I don't follow it 100%. And that's because they give the diagram based on an overall sense. My fabric might be slightly wider or narrower. My pieces, like this skirt piece, I have shortened. And so I might be able to fit it a little more economically than what they do. And things like this pocket, for example, that pocket's pretty much going to be hidden. It's going to be inside. So on their layouts, they will only have that pocket laid out right side up because the stretch is the same, whether it's up or down. I can put that pocket upside down, save some space, and it's not going to bother anything. So it's that kind of thing. And in general, I try to get my biggest pieces out of the way. So like the skirt piece, I'll put my skirt piece on here, fudge it back and forth, fit as many things around it as I can, cut that, and then go to the next thing. Now I wanted to point one thing out on knit fabric. It will stretch as it was meant to. So when you're cutting out, if you have a bunch of it, don't let it hang over the side of your table so that it's like putting some weight on a certain part, because that part could stretch out. So when you pull it up to cut the next section, your fabric might be stretched a little bit and you might not get as accurate of a cut as if it was just sitting aside and resting, if that makes any sense. So that's what I'm doing. I'm letting my fabric just kind of hang out over there while I do this part, and then I'll move it forward. All right, so my microphone was turned off when I filmed this, so I'm going to try to remember what I was saying. First thing I'm going to do is mark all of my bodice pieces, and I punch holes in my circles with my little puncher, as you can see. And I'm going to be actually using a different pen than I normally do. I'm going to be using a lot of fusibles, so I'm going to be using that water-soluble marker that I'm holding instead of the heat erasable one that I usually do. And I'm also going to be using that marker to mark my notches instead of clipping them this time, just because it's going to be a lot easier for me to see them. And I wanted to also note that it would be a really good idea before you get started sewing on your fabric that you've cut out for your garment to use those scraps that you've cut out, and go over to your machine and play with different stitches, play with different threads and different settings, different needles. I'm using a ballpoint needle just to make sure that you've got everything under control before you get started. So here I am. After I mark my dots for my bust, I do use my marking tools to draw out the lines for them. That just helps me when I'm actually at my machine stitching. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pin my darts that I just marked so I can go ahead and sew them. That's the apex, and these are the little circles that we drew. So I put a pin in one circle, and then back out the other circle. And I also am going to put a pin up at the apex right there so that I can fold it up exactly the way they want. And then I just adjust the pins so that everything is lining up. Machine, and I've got a scrap of fabric here to test a couple different ways of making stitches or sewing, just to find out what's going to work best for you and your fabric and your machine. I've got a piece of my stay tape fused on here at an angle, and I'm going to try that, and then I'm also going to stitch it without it just to see how my machine's going to react. I want to make sure that for the dart that the stitches stay nice and firm. And so when I'm sewing, I'm going to actually put a little bit of pressure onto my fabric so that there's not going to be any bunching or anything like that. I'm not tugging on it, but I'm putting enough pressure on it that there'll be a little bit of stitch built into that straight stitch so that if it does get stretched, no threads are going to be popping. That's my goal. So in addition to this, I will stitch it on the strip that has the stay tape fused to it and try a few different things just to see what's going to work. And I'd encourage you to do that too, to get all of your experiments out before you actually use your fabric. So that's just showing you that's my regular straight stitch. It's going to work, and all good. Now over at my ironing board, I'm showing you the dart that I sewed. I'm going to be pressing it down, but there's these blue marks that I'm going to want to get rid of, and I have a spray bottle, just handy, so I can mist it with water, let it evaporate off, but as soon as I get it a little bit wet, those blue marks are going to disappear. So that's great stuff. If I don't get everything erased with my little spray bottle, it's not really a big deal because as soon as I wash it the first time, everything else that I've forgotten will come off. So I'm just showing you that you can use that kind of pen. I'm going to be pressing it down. Now when you press it, you just press straight down. You don't wiggle your iron. This is the wooden spoon technique. If you're going to be pressing the seam down so that you don't want the imprint of that dart to be pressing into your fabric, I use a wooden spoon and I put it right underneath the seam so that when I press it, I'm only hitting the highest point of that spoon, which is where the seam is. And the head of the spoon makes sure that it's going to stay flat and stay in place. There are very technical names for these devices that you can use for this. It looks like a wooden dowel that's cut in half, but a long-handled wooden spoon works great too. So I'm just showing you so that way if you don't want, or if you have a fabric that's in danger of having the imprint because you have a really thick layer, this is a great technique for pressing little seams. I want to make sure that my neckline is not going to stretch out of shape. This would be like a stay stitch type thing, but because stitching on fabric like this can cause issues, fusibles are your friend, but you have to be very careful how you use it. So what I am using is actually, I'm trimming pieces off of a very lightweight waistband interfacing, just because it's already kind of in a strip. You can just trim a regular lightweight piece of interfacing if you want. And I'm going to be fusing it very gently to my neckline. And see how I have a lot of steam? And I'm just touching it on here. I want it to adhere, but I don't want to push down too hard on the knit material. So go ahead, find something that is in your stash that will work. There's a lot of different things. You can use, seam tape. I have a whiter seam tape that's more from like my tailoring stuff. It's a woven. It's like a cotton woven that has fusibles on it. There's a lot of things, but just something to hold it secure. So you really want to make sure that what you are using as your stabilizer is not heavier than your fashion fabric. If you are using a interfacing that's really stiff, like one that's used for cuffs or something, this is going to really stick out a whole lot that you don't want. So you want it to be secure. See, now I can pull that and it's not going to go anywhere. But you don't want it to be stiff. So see what you can find. I'm going to do this same treatment on the back bodice piece because it has a very similar neckline. Okay, so this is my bodice back, and I wanted to point out that I am not actually, I have a serger, but I am not serging all of my edges. I want them to be as sleek as possible. So it may seem strange because I use my serger on just about all of my wovens, but I'm not going to be using it on this. Now I have pressed my center back seam open, which, be very careful. Just don't press down hard. Do it very lightly. If you need to press the the seam, use the very tip of your iron and just run that down, okay? Now, up here is where we're going to be putting a binding. So I'm going to be putting my my reinforcement on here, just like I did on the front. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be doing is sewing the shoulder seams. And once again, this is another point that needs to get reinforced. So you can do the tape, some of these little strips that we cut off when doing here, we could do some of that. Another option that I've used is I have some of this clear elastic. That's the label. Basically, it's about 1/4 inch. It's extremely thin, but it's got a nice stretch to it. This is good. I have this because it's great for making the little straps that you put on hangers and things like that. But where it also comes in handy is if you're trying to reinforce a stitch like this, what you can do is as you sew that stitch, just put a layer of this down and stitch over it. You're not going to see it. It's clear, it's very soft, so it'll be fairly invisible, but that extra bit of elastic is going to make it so that if, say this was a long sleeve and it had a lot of weight or something, it was starting to stretch down off your shoulder, as soon as that weight is off, the elastic's going to make it want to bounce back up together. This is what I'm going to be doing on the shoulders. Okay, so I am just laying my clear elastic over my fabric. I'm not stretching it, I'm just holding it still. And I'm going to be sewing it at the 5/8, locking it in, just moving forward. And I'm going to try to center it on my needle. Get to the end, lock it in, and then I'll move to my next strip. Alright, so if you can see, there's my line of stitching and there's elastic under there. So if I was to stretch it, it's going to want to come back. It's basically, even though there's stretching fibers in the fabric itself, this is just one more support to help it keep its shape. So the next piece we're going to be dealing with is this neckband. So the first thing, it's cut on a fold, so it's one long strip. The first thing you need to do is mark your dots and mark your notches. So I've taken my neckband and I've sewn the ends together and pressed that end open. And what I'm going to do next is, like the directions say, fold it in half, and I'm going to actually press it a little bit so I can see where this center crease should be. And again, I'm not going back and forth, I'm just going straight up and down, just so I can open it back up and see where that crease is. Alright, so I have it all pressed in half so that now I can open it up to the inside, to the wrong side, and see that center line. Now, this is how I do it. Everyone does it their way. This is me. I get this stuff. It's the fusible bonding, like Stitch Witchery, just the long tubes. And I put it on here right up at the fold edge. Okay, so I'm going to put on enough of it that I can get a little strip here, fold it over, and you'll be able to feel when you hit that edge when you're folding it, because it gives it a little bit of structure. And just press it down as you go. And what this is going to do, well, it's going to hold it together, going to give you a nice sharp edge, and it still stretches. The fusible bonding isn't going to keep it from stretching. It will still stretch, but it's going to eliminate the need for a whole lot of pins, and you're going to get a nicer, more professional looking edge. So just keep working your way around. Put a little in and press and shift. Put a little more in along that fold edge. Bring the top down and press. Just like that. So now I have it all pressed with my little stitch witchery on the inside, and you can see it's going to hold its shape. It's not going to come open while I'm sewing it, and I have a nice edge that I'm going to be able to kind of stretch and form around my neckline. Alright, so now I am taking my neckband and I am going to attach it to my bodice neckline. So you match up the seams, center back, then the center front, and there's little dots where your shoulder seams are. And I'm using clips just because sometimes it's easier to use clips on knits. Not necessary, but it's easier for me. So I'm matching up those dots. And the thing with the water-soluble pin, if I don't get them all sprayed out and vanished right now, as soon as I wash it the first time, they'll be gone. So I'm not really worried about it too much. So I have it anchored in those 4 points. I'm going to go ahead and ease it in, make it fit, and because we have some stitching, we'll be able to work it nicely around these corners. Alright, so the first seam we're going to run is at 3/8 of an inch, and I am sewing it with my bodice up and the band down. That way I can see very clearly where my edges are, and I can work it around my edges as I go. Alright, so I'm coming up to my last corner. I've been trying to get a good shot of this corner. I'm at 3/8, coming up. Here's my corner. Just guiding that edge of the band so it's along the same edge. And I'm going to keep on going, just stretching that band just a little bit. Get to the corner and round that corner. I'm not doing a sharp pivot on it, I'm just doing a nice rounded corner. So then I can straighten it up and finish off my band. So right now, that's what it looks like on the outside, which is pretty nice. What it wants you to do is come back, and in this seam allowance here, run another line of stitches in the seam allowance, about 1/8 of an inch from this one. So this was at a 3/8. The next one's going to be run at a 1/4 inch elastic. Not elastic, allowance. For me, a 1/4 inch is right along the edge of my presser foot. Now, when I did it before, I had the bodice up. This time I'm having the tape side up, just so I can get a better look at it and make sure everything looks good from this side also. So this is the inside, and these are my 2 rows of stitching. And I've got a little, thread here, facing showing there. What I'm going to do before I finish up this part is I'm going to come back and trim, and I'm going to try to make a nice trim about 1/8 of an inch just past that last row of stitching, just to try to even up and clean up any jagged edge that might be there, because that's going to be our finishing. And actually it looks pretty darn good. And when you get to the corners, a couple little clippies probably wouldn't hurt for turning it, but don't come too near to that 1/4 inch area, because what we're going to be doing once you have it trimmed is putting it, so this is my right side now. We're going to be taking it to the ironing board and pressing, again, just straight up and down, not a back and forth. Pressing it so that the seam allowance is on the inside and just that edge of the band is showing on the outside. So at this point I have it pressed, and I am top stitching around the edge. So what I'm doing is guiding the inside, this side here, of my presser foot against the pressed under edge here. And that's going to be my guide for sewing my top stitching all the way around. So let's see if I can get over here. So it's like this. So here's my band, and here's my top stitching. And I just wanted to point out, I did end up coming back and clipping, where am I? Here, clipping these corners to that 1/4 inch line. I think one of them I actually went a little bit past it, but not to the 3/8. That way it would open up, that way it'll open up better and lay flatter on the outside. So just to let you know, if you get to where you're pressing your corners, top stitching your corners, and it's just not working out here, I did have to cut mine just to open it up a bit. So I've got my sleeve backs and my sleeve fronts. The first thing, of course, that I'm going to do is punch my holes, mark my circles, mark my notches, and then I will be right back. All right, so I'm going to match up a set of these guys here, and as always, on my back pieces down here by my underarm seam, I put a letter B, so I can know at a glance that that is a back piece. So the first thing we're going to do is over on the long side, for the view that I'm doing, there are 2 little dots. We're going to be stitching everywhere along that seam except between those 2 little dots, and that's where the tie is going to be making a little knot. So I'm going to stitch up here, back stitch and stop, and then up there. Okay, so here's my sleeve. I have the center seam sewed and my seam allowances pressed open. And I'm going to put more of this seam bonding, stitch witchery, whatever you want to call it, in here the entire way. And because I'm pressing on this side of it, where there's a chance that some of that goo is going to come out, I'm going to use a protector, and this is a strip from a piece of Teflon sheeting. I use this stuff on my baking sheets and things in the kitchen, and I had an extra end that I'd cut off, and it is fabulous for ironing, especially for fusibles, because nothing sticks to it. It's literally Teflon, so you can press as long and hard as you want, and even if there's any goo that comes through, yeah, this lasts forever too, so highly recommended. I bought mine on eBay, but you do you. So here is where the little dots are, and you can see I haven't erased them yet, but there's an opening right there. Okay, so I'm doing the view with the ties. So we have these 2 big long oval pieces that make up the tie, and what you're going to do is fold them in half lengthwise. Get these to match up well, and we're going to be sewing. Hang on. Okay, we're going to be sewing in and leaving an opening in the middle. So I'll be sewing in from here and from this way, leaving an opening in the middle so I can flip them. All right, so I've got my strips sewn. I am trimming the points down a little ways just to take any bulk out of here, and I am going to be flipping them with this one. I've had several little turning tools, but I'm going to use this one again today. So just put the tip of it up to the point, close it up like a lobster claw, and bring it through. Okay, so I'm going to do the other 3, and then go over to the ironing board and press these open so that they're going to sit nice and flat. Okay, so I have this far on my sleeves. I've got my little straps sewn together, and I'm just going to kind of put this aside for right now and work on the skirt for a little while. I'll be coming back to that in a bit. So this is my skirt back piece. Before I take the tissue off, I want to point out that there are 2 sets of dots on the front and the back on the sides. This is where your pockets are going to be attached. So what you're going to need to do is mark these dots on both the front and back and all of the associated registration marks. So I'm going to go ahead and pin these at the center back, and I just wanted to say, just like always, in my back pieces, just like my back sleeves, I put a letter B. Just so, at a glance, I can figure out what is what. And I'm going to be sewing my back seam, my center seams closed just with a regular, straight, slightly stretchy stitch, and I will be pressing this seam open. I'm not going to be using the stitch witchery on this seam because it will be interior, and it's not that important that it always stays perfectly flat. So that was just for the sleeve because there was that opening where the little tie thing is going to go through. Okay, so this is my back. It's sewn together at the center back, and the seam allowances are pressed open. Now I'm going to flip this over so my right sides are up, and I have cut out 4 of the pockets. So I'm going to grab 2 of these to sew onto this back, and the other 2 will be sewn onto the front. Hang on a second. Now on this side, you can tell that if I line up the pocket piece, put it down here. Okay, so here's my pocket piece, and here's my fabric, and that's my little dot that I marked to show where my pocket goes. And you can tell by looking at the pattern that it's going to line up the same at the very top. So with that, making sure I grab the right side of the pocket, of course, what I need to do is line up my pocket at the very top and just take it down this edge. Okay, I'm going to be sewing down here at 3/8 of an inch from top to bottom. And I'm going to do that on both sides of my back. And I'm going to be doing these same steps for the front. So I'm going to be taking the front skirt, transferring the markings, stitching the center front and pressing it open, and then attaching 2 pockets to the front, just like I'm going to do here. Alright, so my pocket is sewn on, and I want to show you the seam allowance is pressed towards the pocket. So here's my skirt, it's still open, and I have pressed it so that the seam allowance is folding up to the pocket. Now I'm going to come back, and on this side, in the seam allowance part of the skirt, but inside the pocket, I'm going to put a row of stitching just inside the sewing line. So it's going to be top stitched or under stitched or however you want to call this, right here on the inside of the pocket. So if you can see right here, there is my top stitching line, and what that is going to do is help this pocket so that when I fold that pocket in, all of this seaming here is going to disappear. It's just going to naturally and easily roll to the inside of that pocket. So you'll just get a really nice edge on the outside. Okay, so this is my side front, and I'm laying my side back, or my back on top of it. And what I'm doing is I'm matching up the edges of my pockets. The dots are this point here in my pocket here and down the front. Now when we sew this, we're going to be sewing at a 5/8 inch seam allowance this time. I have my skirt pinned together at the sides here, and this is the pocket, and it's the same. The right and the left side are the same. So I want to show you how you're going to be stitching. Is first you're going to start up here and stitch at 5/8 all the way around the pocket, up and then down. Now here's the detail on what's going on at this intersection here. So you're at 5/8 coming up this way, okay? You're going to cross all of this stitching here, and once you cross it, you're going to go about 1/8 of an inch past it. Here's the dot, so that's how you know that we're in the right place. We're going to go 1/8 of an inch past all this stitching, pivot, and then head towards the bottom. Then, at the top of the skirt up here, on this side, on the skirt side of your pocket, you're going to be stitching from the very top, about 1/8 of an inch that side of all the stitching, straight down till you get to the level of your dot here. Okay, so just double check and make sure that both of your layers, the front and the back, are lined up right, so that when you stitch straight down, that everything that should be hidden is over there and is hidden. So I'm going to go ahead and do this side, the other side exactly the same way. Okay, so at this point, this is sewn and I've been pressing it open. So I've got it on my ironing board here. What I need to make sure is which side is the back. And I'm looking, nope, no B there. Do I have one here? Yes, I have a little B in my seam allowance here, so I know that's the back. So because our pocket is going to go towards the front, when you get up to underneath the pocket, you clip the back seam allowance, excuse me, clip that back seam allowance almost to the stitching so that you can press it open all the way up here. Okay, now once you get to that point, let me bring it up the ironing board a little more. So here's the top of my pocket, and I'm going to lay it so the top of my pocket matches up with the top edge of that skirt front, and stick a few pins in there to hold it in place. So this seam allowance is pointing towards the pocket, towards the front, okay? And I'm just going to lay this pocket here for right now. And then I'm going to bring my iron up here and just press straight down on here, okay? And what that should be doing is fixing the seam underneath. So let's see what it looks like. Okay, I think it's lovely. So here is the seam. The pocket goes in here, and let's see if I can get this close enough. If you can see, you don't see any of the stitching here. Because of that stay stitching we did, it all rolls nicely to the inside. So that's hidden. Plus, when you stitch in a little bit, it gives a nice little protective overlap. So you have like about 1/8 of an inch of fabric out there. So that's nice. That's nice. It's a nice protected pocket. So at this point, you're probably wondering why I have left this upper bodice open instead of sewing the side seams. Well, at this point, I don't know why I did that either, because I was planning on doing my skirt a little bit differently. I was planning on doing the front skirt, sewing it to the bodice, the back skirt, sewing it to the bodice, and then sewing all the way up. But I got so carried away doing the pockets on here, I forgot that. So we're going to go back, honestly, to the construction method that's in the directions. So I'm going to back up a little bit, sew my side seams on my bodice, and press them open. Finish the sleeves, set them in, and then attach the skirt. So, you know, I got carried away. So anyway, back to side seams on bodice. Alrighty, so I need to share something with you. I was trimming off some threads, getting this bodice all nice and settled in here, ready to sew up the side seams, and I cut a hole in it. And I was thinking, oh, I would just, you know, stitch over it really quick and maybe no one will notice. But then I was thinking, you know, I am probably not the only person out there who has ever cut a hole in their garment while they're working on it, just because, you know, you got a lot of sharp scissors around. So I want to show you how I'm going to fix it. First, here it is. Oh my goodness, and it's right on the front too. Not even the back, it's right on the front. So the first thing I did was I found a piece of fabric that is the same as that spot. Okay, if you don't have a print as obvious as this, it'll be a lot easier. So I'm going to put this underneath so that it matches up. Now I'm going to go get some more of that stitch witchery that I've been using, and I'm going to use that underneath here. Let me move over to the ironing board. I still can't believe I did this. So let's see how close I can get here. Now it's right next to where all that thickness is. So what I'm going to do is try to fuse it to this side, open it up. Well, here, let me just take it one step at a time here. Let's fuse it to this side. So I am putting a chunk of my stitch witchery down on that side. Actually, I'm going to put another one right over that. Okay, looks good. So I'm going to put my little Teflon sheet over this because there might be some transfer there. And press. Let's see how we're doing here. All right, so now I have that part done, so I'm going to flip this wrong side out. This part is glued, and I need to trim enough of this that I can tuck it in underneath this seam allowance. Okay, so this part is glued, this is loose, and I trimmed it back so it should be able to go underneath this seam allowance. So I'm going to lift it up, put a little more of my stitch witchery down here, my fabric bond strip, whatever the generic name of it is, and tuck that back in and flip it over. Still can't believe I did that, but you know what? Things happen, and actually it's a good thing to know how to get past it. Because there's a tendency when something like this happens to say, oh, forget it, and just throw up your hands and walk away in disgust. But not today, not today. All right, so it's filled. We have the little slit there, it's filled, and the underneath is the same fabric. Now what I need to do is get a needle and thread and do a little hand work. Okay, so now with a fairly inconspicuous threads, I am going to be very carefully stitching it around the edge, trying to just take tiny stitches just so it is going to be held in place. That bonding agent will hold it for a while, but I don't want to count on that for a long period of time, especially going through the washer and things. So that's why I'm going back. And right now my stitches are close to 1/8 of an inch apart. I'll make the circle. If it looks like I need more stitching, I'll make a second row in between those. But I try to get it all evenly spaced out the first time around. So I have it stitched. I'm going to come underneath here and tie it off underneath, and I'll show you what my repair looks like on the right side. So this is the back of my little patch, and that's the front of my little patch. Okay, it's right here. I think it's going to be fine. All right, I'm going to be sewing now the arm seam on these sleeves. Remember, one of my sleeves is marked with a B, designating that that is the back. So I'm going to do this, press these seams open. Okay, so this is my sleeve. This is the seam I just did, and I pressed it open. And now around the bottom of the sleeve, I am pressing it up 1/2 inch. Okay, just slightly pressing it. And I bet you can figure out what I'm going to be doing, because this name of this video honestly should be called 101 Ways to Use Stitch Witchery When You're Sewing Knits. But similar to the way that we used it when making the neckband, I'm going to use it to make this little hem. And what it's going to do is give us a really, really nice hem, a nice sharp one, so that when we come back and stitch it, it's going to hold its shape really well. And like I said before, because the heat and bond, stitch witchery, whatever you want to call it, because it is just basically glue, and it does stretch. There's no problem with using it on a knit. So I have my little crease there. I'm going to put a piece, and you can just rip off a little chunk, fold it in there, and I'm going to be putting my, hang on a second. Okay. And I'm going to be putting my little Teflon sheet back over here so I can hold it on a little longer. When you have your protective sheet over your fabric, you can actually move your iron around and it's fine. You just can't do that when there's nothing between your iron and the fabric. Okay, so I have fused this together. And this fusing, that's not my permanent hem. I'm going to be coming back and stitching, but it gives it a really, really nice, secure, straight edge so that I can come back and stitch it with a lot of confidence. So I'm going to finish putting this in all the way around. Okay, so I have a nice, think of the fusibleness here like pins. Okay, so I have it basically tacked down, pinned down in a really nice soft hem. Now what I'm going to do is come back and stitch it. And I'm going to, well, first I'm going to turn this right side out. It'll be easier for me. And starting at the underarm here, I'm going to be doing a row of stitches at about 3/8 of an inch. Okay? And just like I normally do on knits, I stretch it a little bit. And this is even more important on this one because this is the arm. Oops, forwards. But by having the Stitch Witchery fusibleness under there, it is so much easier to sew this and get it straight and have it be a really nice tight stitch. Okay, so I'm setting in my sleeves. I've got a sleeve here matching my bottom seam allowances. And then I have my top ones. There's a seam on my sleeve, so it's easy to find the top to match also. And I am double pinning, so I'm pinning each side of that seam down. That way I can make sure that the seam allowances behave when I go over them with my sewing machine. Then on the sides, there's some notches to match up. There's a couple dots to match up. And a lot of it, it's you don't have to run any easing stitches, obviously, because it's stretched. Just work it in, stretch it, and sew in your sleeves. So I got my sleeves sewn on, and I am pressing the seam allowance of the sleeve cap in towards the bodice. Just trying to get it set in there so that it remembers that's where it's supposed to go. I see I've got a little blue dot here I need to get rid of. So spray a little water there. Yep, I think we're good on this sleeve. Okay, so this is my skirt and this is my top. And now I need to attach them to each other. So I'm going to turn my skirt inside out with my top inside here, and I'm going to start pinning it together. So here's a side over here, and making sure that those pockets are aiming towards the front, making sure everything just looks fabulous. So that's on. So we're going to match the side seams, the center back, the center front, and then just kind of work it, pin it around, and I'm going to go to the sewing machine and sew it. Now, this seam, we're going to want to make sure that it has some stretch too, so that when you're pulling it over your head, you're going to need to be able to stretch it just a little bit to get over your shoulders and your chest and everything. So make sure that there's some stretch while you're sewing that waist seam. Alright, so I've got it all pinned here. Now, when I come to stitch it, I'm going to stitch this at probably closer to a 3/4 inch seam allowance or a fat 5/8, because after I do that, I'm going to need to come back up here, probably somewhere between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch in, and sew another seam, which is going to become a seam allowance because we're going to be threading a length of 1/4 inch elastic through here. And I believe that elastic is just to keep it tight in. It's not supposed to look gathered, it's just supposed to give it that extra support so that this seam doesn't want to get too loose. So just don't cut yourself too short when you're going around and stitching this on. At least a generous 5/8 inch for the first run. Alright, so I want to show you what it looks like for me. This is my stitching line, and I actually used my serger to come along that raw edge. Just barely trimmed off anything just to make it even and overcast it. So I have my 2 rows. Now I'm going to go cut my elastic. They gave us a measuring guide here. So I'm going to go cut my elastic. Okay, I have my elastic, and this is my center back. I did not leave any openings as I was sewing. What I'm going to do is pick one of my stitches right here from this center back seam open, so I can use that to thread my elastic through. Hang on a sec. Alright, so I picked a stitch open, then I use my handy dandy bodkin. I am just dropping things today. A dropsies kind of day. Alright, the extra end of my elastic I'm going to straight pin up here so it doesn't go anywhere. Try to make sure I get all the kinks that I can out and just start feeding my bodkin through. Because I'm going through along this inside edge, hopefully I will have clear passage all the way through. So let me do this for a few minutes and I'll show you how it turns out. Okay, so it actually went around pretty easily. I'm going to go ahead, overlap these ends because it's a pretty thin elastic, stitch over that and pop it back in and try to make sure I have it all fluffed out and distributed nicely all the way around. Okay, so I have popped my elastic in. It's all in there nice and flat. And you can see it's not really gathering it, but what it is doing is just giving it a little extra support. So what you're going to do now is come back, open up your dress. What you're going to do is press this. You can probably see better from the inside, huh? Okay, so this is from the inside. What you're going to be doing is pushing this casing with the elastic up towards the bodice, okay? From the outside, I'm going to go ahead and pin that. And then at those 3 spots, at the side seams and the back seam, I'm going to do a little stitch in the ditch right here. This is where the skirt is attached, but right here in the bodice, just to keep that casing upright so it doesn't, get wonky on you. And now the very last thing you're going to do today is put up your dress on your dress form or a padded coat hanger of some kind or something, but it needs to rest overnight at least before you hem it. Because kind of like when you sew a skirt or a dress that's been cut on the bias, it needs time to settle. It's kind of like that with knit dresses. So she's going to need time just to get adjusted to her new self. Oh, I love those pockets. I have not tied the little bow thingies on the sleeve. I'm kind of debating if I should or not. I'm going to wait until the last minute to put those on. It's just a separate tie, so it doesn't affect the dress at all. I might leave it off, but anyway, she's looking good. Good morning. Alright, so she has sat on here all night, and honestly, the length has stayed pretty darn consistent. Got my handy dandy yardstick here. And it's, in general, it's all around 18.5 inches from the floor. Now that's not my finished size because obviously her shoulders are a lot taller than mine. But I feel very safe in going ahead and hemming it up. All right, so I have it inside out here. And I'm just going to be hemming the bottom the way that I hemmed the sleeves. So what I'm doing is I'm going to turn it up. My bottom hem, I'm going to turn it up not too much. Actually, I'm just going to do like a 5/8 inch hem all the way around the bottom. Now, in another video, a future video, I'll show you using a double needle. I'm not going to do that this time, but a double needle is a really nice finish that you can work on hems of knit. I don't know why I'm having trouble coming up with words this morning. So I know I've showed this several times this video, but since this is the hem, it's the last time. You press your fold so you have a little crease. Take a little piece of your fusible bonding, Stitch Witchery, whatever brand you have, and place the edge of it up to where that crease is. Fold it back over and press it down with some steam. Okay, so here's my hem all pressed up, and what's fabulous about using that Stitch Witchery stuff is that I don't have pins to deal with here. It's already formed exactly how I want. And like I said before, it does stretch. That glue doesn't keep it from stretching. But I'm going to sew my hem. My hem, I'm going to just run a straight stitch at just under 5/8, so about 1/2 inch. And I don't have to make sure this one is stretchy, so I'm just going to let it go through normal because my hem doesn't have to stretch. If it does a little bit, that's no problem. But you want to make sure you don't pull too hard so you don't get any ruffling. So here we go. So that is what my finished hem is going to look like. Can we even see? Where it's just a little stitch going around, pretty much invisible, but it's going to hold this in, so I have about 1/8 inch above it, which is just going to hang there. I'm not serging this. I'm not doing anything to add any extra bulk. I'm just going to let it go like that. Okay, so it's still cold outside. It's just above freezing, so I wanted to come inside where it's warm and do the wrap up. The dress in general, it worked really well. The difficulty with this dress is it is a stretch knit, and you need to really pay attention to how you're working with it. So that's why I threw so many different ideas of things to help while you're working with stretch knits. And honestly, I feel like it's a fusible bond commercial, but that is a lifesaver for getting your hem edges, getting a nice sharp edge on things, because it will continue to stretch. It's like super pins. It's going to hold everything exactly where you want it, so you can then go and make your permanent stitches in it well. So the other thing is, when I was putting that interfacing around my neckline, I just wanted to clarify that what I was putting down, it was a waistband interfacing, but the point I was trying to get across is you can use different things. There are certain products which work better than others, but it's just the point that you need to have something at the neckline to just stabilize it, at least until you stitch. Even if it's a tearaway type product, at least something there to stabilize it until you have your permanent stitching in there just to hold that shape. Because I've had some knit dresses that I've made in the past, and pretty soon, you know, the sleeve that would start here is down here, and everything is gaping and everything's just falling apart because there's no stabilizers in it. Now, this particular fabric that I used for this, it's a better quality knit than I have used in the past for some other dresses that have fallen apart on me, so I'm hoping we're good. So the shoulder treatment that I used with the little thin, clear, elasticy strip, and that's a very handy one if you can get that stuff. I buy mine in a tailoring supply. I get a lot of tailoring supply type things where you get like a huge roll of stuff at a time. So the other thing you can do is if you have some ready-made garments that have those little loops on them, just clip those off and use those loops, because that's the same stuff for the shoulders, okay? And the other thing is when you're cutting out your pattern is to make sure you're cutting the right size for you. So I cut mine so that it fits my bust, okay? It's not too big, it's not too small, it's just right there. I have just a slight amount of ease so it's not clingy, because the last thing you want is to do all of this work on a dress, have it be too small, and all of a sudden you get those sausage lines, you know? Oh, okay, so this might be a little TMI moment, but I put it on, and I have these little dents where my bra strap goes, you know? We do, it's just life. But this is a little personal promo here for, these are stick-on silicone shoulder pads. They just, you wash them and they get sticky again, you just pop them on. I just put it over my bra strap, pull the sleeve over, and all of a sudden those little dimples are gone. And they're really nice and they're really comfortable, and you forget you have them on and everything. So I think I got mine on Walmart.com or something, but they're all over the place. But, you know, things like that, just to round it out and everything, it's a help. So anyhow, I'm probably not going to be doing another knit garment for a while. I just wanted to do this one to get these techniques out of the way and let you know that knits aren't that scary, and it actually is very flattering and it's very comfortable. So I hope you enjoy it. Bye-bye.